The radio crackled once, then died. In the cockpit of the downed F-16C Fighting Falcon, Captain Reese Nighthawk Valdez pressed her gloved fingers against the emergency transponder, knowing that somewhere above the canopy of Sierra Leonean jungle, American satellites were tracking her exact coordinates. What she didn't know was that 8,000 miles away in a sterile Pentagon briefing room, a three-star general was staring at those same coordinates on a massive digital display. His jaw clenched as he made a decision that would define the next 72 hours. The crash had happened at 3:47 hours, just as the pre-dawn darkness was beginning to soften over West Africa. Nighthawk's aircraft had been returning from a classified reconnaissance mission when hostile surface-to-air missiles erupted from what intelligence had assured her was empty terrain. The explosion that crippled her starboard engine came without warning, without the familiar electronic warfare tones that usually preceded such encounters. Someone had been waiting. Someone had known exactly when and where she would be flying. Now, 12 hours later, as equatorial heat pressed through her flight suit and the distant sound of diesel engines grew closer, Nighthawk methodically checked her survival kit for the fourth time. 2 signal flares, emergency rations for 72 hours, water purification tablets, a sidearm with 3 magazines, and most importantly, the encrypted satellite communicator that could reach U.S. Central Command with the push of a button. She had pushed that button 6 times since dawn. Each time the response was the same: extraction denied, maintain position, await further orders. What Nighthawk couldn't see from her position beneath the aircraft's twisted fuselage was the convoy of 5 vehicles moving methodically through the jungle roads, their occupants armed with Russian-made weapons and detailed photographs of her face. What she couldn't hear was the heated argument occurring in real time between the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, a conversation that would remain classified for the next 30 years. And what she couldn't possibly understand was that her survival had become secondary to a larger geopolitical calculation involving Chinese mineral rights, European peacekeeping forces, and a fragile ceasefire that her rescue might shatter. The only thing she knew for certain was that the standard military protocol for downed aircrew in hostile territory had been abandoned. In her 8 years of service, including 2 combat deployments, she had never heard of extraction being refused for an active pilot with confirmed coordinates. Something was fundamentally wrong. As the engine sounds grew louder and the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Captain Reese Valdez made a decision that would force the hand of everyone watching her from above. She reached for the radio one more time, but this time, her transmission would be different. 5 years earlier, when Reese Valdez first arrived at Nellis Air Force Base for advanced fighter training, the other pilots had a nickname for her that wasn't Nighthawk. They called her Lucky, and not as a compliment. She had graduated 3rd in her class from the Air Force Academy, earned her wings on the 2nd attempt, and somehow managed to secure a slot in the prestigious 64th Aggressor Squadron despite what her instructors diplomatically described as unconventional tactical instincts. The male pilots, many of whom had been flying since they were old enough to see over a cockpit, watched her with barely concealed skepticism. But Lieutenant Valdez had grown up in the shadow of Edwards Air Force Base, where her father worked as a civilian contractor, and her mother served as an air traffic controller. She had been listening to pilot chatter since childhood, memorizing the cadence of radio calls and the subtle differences between confidence and bravado. When she finally climbed into the cockpit of an F-16 for the first time, it felt less like learning something new and more like remembering something she had always known. Her breakthrough came during a training exercise over the Nevada desert, when her flight leader ordered her to play the role of an enemy aircraft in a complex air-to-air combat scenario. The script called for her to be shot down within the first 10 minutes, allowing the more experienced pilots to practice advanced maneuvers. Instead, she disappeared from radar for 43 minutes, reappearing behind the entire formation and achieving theoretical kills on 6 aircraft before anyone realized what had happened. When she landed, Her flight leader was waiting on the tarmac with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. "Where the hell did you go, Lieutenant?" he demanded, his flight suit still damp with nervous sweat. "Low and slow through the canyon systems," she replied, pulling off her helmet to reveal hair plastered to her head. "If you fly close enough to the rocks, radar can't distinguish you from the terrain. That's not how we do things here." "Maybe that's the problem." The conversation was overheard by Colonel Marcus Webb, the squadron commander, who had been evaluating the exercise from the control tower. That night, he called her into his office and asked a single question. "Do you think the enemy is going to follow our training protocols?" "No, sir." "Neither do I report to advanced tactics training Monday morning." That was the beginning of her reputation as someone who thought differently, who saw possibilities where others saw limitations. But it was also the beginning of the whispers that would follow her through her entire career. The nickname Nighthawk came later, during her first combat deployment to the Middle East, when she successfully completed a night reconnaissance mission through heavily defended airspace using techniques that weren't in any manual. She had flown so low that her aircraft's exhaust signature was masked by ground heat, navigating by visual landmarks while every radar system in the region searched for her. When she returned with critical intelligence about enemy positions, the mission was classified at the highest levels. The pilots who flew with her that night started calling her Nighthawk, and the name stuck. But success brought its own problems. The more unconventional her methods, the more resistance she faced from commanders who preferred predictability over innovation. Her efficiency reports were filled with phrases like "exceptional pilot" and "requires closer supervision." She was promoted on schedule but never fast-tracked, always viewed as valuable but potentially problematic. When the assignment to West Africa came through, many of her colleagues assumed it was either a punishment or a way to keep her away from more sensitive operations. Now, sitting in the jungle with hostile forces closing in, those same unconventional instincts were telling her something that military protocol didn't want to acknowledge. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one shooting at you, but the one claiming to be on your side. The first vehicle appeared through the trees at 15:47 hours, its driver navigating carefully around fallen logs and dense undergrowth. From her concealed position beneath the aircraft's starboard wing, Nighthawk could see the distinctive outline of an older model Toyota pickup truck with reinforced bumpers and what appeared to be a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. The windshield was cracked but not shattered, suggesting this wasn't a military vehicle, but rather something converted for civilian use. 3 men emerged from the cab, their movements cautious but not particularly tactical. They wore mismatched clothing and carried AK-47 variants, but their approach to the crash site was more curious than aggressive. One of them, a thin man with graying hair, held what looked like a handheld radio and was speaking in rapid bursts of French and what Nighthawk recognized as Creole, the local pidgin language. She had been trained in escape and evasion, but the scenario had always assumed that rescue would come within 24 hours. Standard doctrine called for pilots to avoid contact with local populations, maintain radio silence except for emergency transmissions, and wait for extraction. But standard doctrine had never envisioned a situation where extraction was indefinitely delayed for political reasons. As the men began examining her aircraft, Nighthawk faced a decision that would have profound consequences. Her emergency radio had enough battery power for perhaps 6 more transmissions. She could continue following orders, remaining hidden while these men potentially discovered evidence of her classified mission. Or she could take control of her own situation and find out why her government seemed more concerned with maintaining plausible deniability than bringing her home. The thin man with the radio had found something. He was pointing at the ejection seat mechanism and speaking rapidly into his device. Even from 30 yards away, Nighthawk could hear the excitement in his voice. Whatever he had discovered, It was significant enough to warrant immediate reporting to someone else. She made her choice. Stepping out from behind the wing with her hands visible but her sidearm ready, she called out in the French she had learned during intelligence briefings. Je suis le pilote. Je ne suis pas votre ennemi. The three men froze, their weapons immediately swinging in her direction. For a moment that stretched far longer than it actually lasted, four people stood in a jungle clearing staring at each other while the afternoon heat pressed down like a physical weight. The most dangerous part of any first contact wasn't the weapons or the language barrier. It was the moment when everyone had to decide whether they were looking at an enemy or an opportunity. The thin man lowered his rifle first, though his companions kept theirs trained on her position. He spoke in heavily accented English. "American pilot, we know you are here. We have been waiting." Those words sent a chill through Nighthawk that had nothing to do with the jungle humidity. Waiting implied advanced knowledge, which meant either her mission had been compromised or these men were part of some larger operation. Her hand drifted slightly closer to her sidearm as she processed the implications. "Who are you waiting for?" she asked, maintaining eye contact while using her peripheral vision to track the positions of all three men. "Not who, what?" The man gestured toward her aircraft. "Your airplane carries very special equipment that certain people want very much." The pieces began falling into place with terrifying clarity. Her reconnaissance mission had involved testing a new electronic warfare pod, a prototype system that could identify and disrupt enemy communication across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. The technology was so advanced that only 3 aircraft in the entire Air Force were equipped with it, and the operational parameters were classified above top secret. If hostile forces had known about the equipment and deliberately targeted her aircraft, it would explain both the precise timing of the surface-to-air missile attack and the Pentagon's reluctance to authorize a rescue mission. Recovery operations inevitably left evidence, created witnesses, and generated paperwork that could be subpoenaed by congressional committees or leaked to foreign intelligence services. "The equipment is damaged," she said carefully, testing his level of knowledge. "Perhaps, but computers can be repaired, especially when you have the right motivation." The second man, younger and more nervous, said something in rapid Creole. The thin man replied with obvious irritation, then turned back to Nighthawk. "My associate suggests that we should simply take what we came for and leave you here. I disagree. You are worth more alive than dead, but only if you cooperate." Nighthawk had participated in dozens of training scenarios involving capture and interrogation, but those exercises had always assumed that American forces would eventually mount a rescue operation. This situation was different. She was facing people who seemed to know exactly what they were looking for and had probably been planning this operation for weeks or months. Her radio crackled to life with an incoming transmission from Central Command. "Nighthawk, this is Overlord. Maintain radio silence and avoid contact with local nationals. Extraction timeline remains indefinite." The timing of the transmission couldn't have been worse. All three men heard it clearly, and their expressions shifted from cautious negotiation to predatory calculation. The decision tree that every pilot learned during survival training suddenly became very simple. Cooperate with captors who might keep you alive, or resist and face immediate execution. But there was a third option that hadn't been covered in any manual, one that required abandoning everything she had been taught about following orders and trusting the chain of command. She could take control. "How much do you know about that equipment?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The thin man smiled, revealing teeth stained by years of tobacco use. "Enough to know that it is worth more than this entire country's annual budget. Enough to know that your government would rather see it destroyed than allow it to fall into the wrong hands. and enough to know that you are the only person within 1,000 miles who understands how to operate it. What he didn't know was that Captain Reese Valdez had spent the last 2 years working with the development team that created the system, and she understood its capabilities far better than anyone realized. More importantly, she knew its weaknesses. Every piece of advanced military technology had built-in safeguards to prevent unauthorized use, and the electronic warfare pod was no exception. But those safeguards required specific activation codes that changed daily, codes that were stored in the pilot's personal encryption device and automatically deleted if certain conditions were met. One of those conditions was extended separation from friendly forces. She had perhaps 6 hours before the system would automatically render itself permanently inoperable. The question was whether she could convince these men that she needed to reach American forces in order to prevent that from happening, or whether she should let them discover the truth the hard way. "I need to make a radio call," she said. "No calls to your military." "Not to the military, to the manufacturer. If you want that equipment to function, you need activation codes that only they can provide." It was a lie, but a plausible one. The thin man exchanged glances with his companions, clearly weighing the potential benefits against the obvious risks. "You make the call where we can hear every word. Any attempt to signal for help, and this negotiation ends permanently." Nighthawk nodded, reaching slowly for her satellite communicator. But instead of calling the fictional manufacturer, she was going to do something that would either save her life or end her career. She was going to broadcast code Bravo on an open frequency, the emergency signal that indicated an American military member was acting under duress. And she was going to broadcast it twice, which meant something entirely different. The satellite communicator in Nighthawk's hands represented more than just a lifeline to American forces. It was a direct connection to a global network of intelligence assets that monitored every electronic emission in real time. When she powered on the device, she knew that somewhere in a windowless building in Maryland, a computer algorithm would automatically flag her signal and begin recording everything that followed. "The frequency I need is civilian," she told the thin man, whose name she had learned was Anton during the past hour of careful conversation. "The manufacturer monitors emergency channels for situations exactly like this." Anton nodded, though his grip on his rifle never relaxed. His two companions had taken positions that gave them clear fields of fire while remaining concealed from aerial observation. They were not professional soldiers, but they weren't amateurs either. Nighthawk adjusted the communicator to a frequency that she knew was monitored by multiple intelligence agencies, then keyed the microphone. "Bravo 77, this is November Hotel 44. I need immediate technical assistance for a Type C equipment malfunction. Authentication code follows. Bravo Bravo." She released the key and waited. Somewhere in the intelligence community, analysts would be scrambling to decode a message that appeared to be routine technical support, but actually contained multiple layers of emergency signaling. The Bravo Bravo authentication was particularly significant. It indicated that she was in immediate danger but capable of operational decision-making. The response came faster than she had expected. "November Hotel 44, this is Bravo 77. We show your location and understand your technical requirements. Stand by for specialist consultation." Anton gestured for her to continue. He clearly understood enough English to follow the conversation, but not enough to detect the subtle irregularities that would alert a trained listener. "Bravo 77, my equipment experienced catastrophic failure during routine operations. Local technicians are available to assist, but they require activation protocols for Type C systems. Can you provide remote authorization?" The pause that followed lasted exactly 37 seconds, long enough for her message to be relayed through multiple command levels, and for someone with serious authority to make a decision. November Hotel 44, negative on remote authorization. Type C systems require physical presence of certified personnel. However, we can provide temporary bypass procedures that will maintain functionality for up to 6 hours. Do you copy? Copy Bravo 77. Please transmit bypass procedures. What followed was a series of seemingly technical instructions that were actually carefully coded intelligence. Her exact position, the number and apparent affiliation of her captors, the status of her aircraft and equipment, and most importantly, a request for immediate extraction regardless of political considerations. But buried within that technical jargon was something else. Confirmation that her situation had been elevated to the highest levels of government, and that a decision had been made to treat her survival as a national security priority. When the transmission ended, Anton studied her face carefully. "Your people will help us access the equipment." "They'll provide the codes," she replied. "But the activation process is complex. It requires someone who understands the system architecture." This was the crucial moment. Everything depended on whether Anton believed that she was valuable enough to keep alive, and whether he understood that killing her would render the captured equipment worthless. His decision came in the form of a brief conversation with his companions in Rapid Creo, followed by a sharp whistle that brought 2 more men emerging from the jungle. These newcomers were different. Their clothing was more uniform, their weapons newer, and their movements displayed the kind of tactical awareness that suggested professional military training. "Change of plans," Antlin announced. "We're moving to a more secure location." One of the newcomers, a muscular man with ritual scarring on his cheeks, spoke in accented English. "The equipment comes with us. So does she." Nighthawk realized that what had begun as an opportunistic encounter with local scavengers had transformed into something far more sophisticated. The men who had been waiting for her weren't random militia members. They were part of an organized operation with the resources and knowledge to identify, track, and capture advanced American military technology. As they began the process of dismounting the electronic warfare pod from her aircraft, she noticed something that sent another chill through her. They had the right tools for the job, and they knew exactly which components to prioritize. Someone had provided them with detailed technical specifications. The 6-hour journey to what Anton called a secure facility took them through jungle paths that showed signs of regular use and maintenance. This wasn't a hastily improvised operation. It was part of an established network with the infrastructure to support extended operations in remote territory. Nighthawk rode in the back of the second vehicle, her hands zip-tied but loose enough to maintain circulation. The man with the scarred face, who identified himself only as Commander, sat across from her with his weapon casually pointed in her direction. "Your government abandoned you," he said during the 3rd hour of travel. "You know this, yes?" She didn't respond, but he continued anyway. "They could have sent helicopters, fast jets, even ground forces, but they chose to leave you here because rescuing you would create complications." The accuracy of his assessment was disturbing. Either he had access to American intelligence analysis, or he understood geopolitical calculations better than most military officers. "What kind of complications?" she asked, testing his knowledge. "The kind that happen when major powers compete for influence in small countries with valuable resources. Your aircraft was flying reconnaissance missions to map Chinese mining operations. Your rescue would confirm that America is actively monitoring those operations, which would force China to respond, which would destabilize the entire region." His explanation was sophisticated enough to be credible and detailed enough to suggest access to classified information. But it also contained something unexpected, an implication that her captors understood the larger strategic context and might be playing a more complex game than simple equipment theft. So what do you want? What we have always wanted: leverage. Your equipment gives us technological capabilities, your presence gives us political options, and your knowledge gives us the ability to use both effectively. The vehicle stopped at what appeared to be an abandoned mining complex, its concrete buildings weathered but structurally sound. Solar panels had been installed on several rooftops, and she could see communication antennas disguised as mining equipment. This wasn't a temporary camp, it was a permanent installation. As they escorted her into the largest building, Nighthawk counted at least 20 armed men and women, multiple satellite communication systems, and sophisticated computer equipment that looked distinctly non-African in origin. Whatever she had stumbled into, it was far larger and more organized than anything her intelligence briefings had suggested existed in this part of West Africa. The interrogation room was surprisingly comfortable, air-conditioned, well-lit, with chairs that didn't require restraints. Commander sat across a metal table from her while Anton operated what appeared to be digital recording equipment. "Let's begin with something simple," Commander said. "Your real name, rank, and unit assignment." She provided the information requested, knowing that all of it was already available through open sources. Now something more interesting: the specific capabilities of the Type C electronic warfare system currently being examined by our technical specialists. This was the moment she had been preparing for during the entire journey. Her response would determine whether she lived long enough to see rescue, escaped on her own, or became a permanent resident of this facility. "The system is designed for electromagnetic spectrum dominance," she said carefully. "It can identify, track, and disrupt enemy communications across multiple frequency bands simultaneously. We know that much from the technical specifications we obtained. What we need to know is how it operates in real-world conditions and what its limitations are." The phrase "technical specifications we obtained" confirmed her worst suspicions. Someone with access to classified American military documents had provided detailed information about her aircraft and its equipment. This wasn't a random encounter or even a sophisticated theft. It was an intelligence operation that had been planned and executed with inside knowledge. "Who provided you with those specifications?" Commander smiled. "That's not your concern. Your concern is demonstrating that you're valuable enough to justify keeping alive." For the next 2 hours, they went through a detailed technical discussion that revealed both the extent of her captor's knowledge and the gaps in their understanding. They knew what the equipment was supposed to do, but they didn't understand the operational doctrine that governed its use or the tactical limitations that affected its effectiveness. More importantly, they didn't understand that the system had been designed with specific vulnerabilities that would allow American forces to disable it remotely if necessary. When the session ended, Commander escorted her to a small but clean room with a cot, basic sanitation facilities, and a barred window that looked out over the mining complex. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow we begin practical demonstrations." As the door locked behind him, Nighthawk surveyed her surroundings and began planning. The window bars were solid, but the walls were concrete block construction that might be vulnerable to the right kind of pressure. The door was heavy steel, but the hinges were on the inside where she could potentially access them. More importantly, she had counted the guard rotations during her brief walk through the facility and identified at least 3 potential exit routes. But escape would be meaningless without a way to prevent her captors from accessing the classified technology they had captured. And that meant she needed to find a way to activate the system's self-destruct sequence without arousing suspicion. The demonstration began at dawn with Commander leading her to a workshop where American military equipment was laid out like components of a massive technical puzzle. The electronic warfare pod had been carefully disassembled, its individual components photographed and cataloged with the kind of methodical precision that suggested professional intelligence analysis. "Your people were very helpful," Commander said, gesturing towards several laptops displaying technical diagrams. "These specifications made our work much easier." Nighthawk studied the displayed information and felt her blood run cold. The diagrams weren't just technical specifications. They were complete operational manuals including classified maintenance procedures, software architecture, and security protocols. Someone with extraordinary access to American military secrets had provided information that would normally require multiple levels of authorization just to view. "We need you to verify that our understanding is correct," Anton said, pointing to a series of circuit boards arranged on a workbench. "These components should interface with standard communication systems, yes." She examined the setup carefully, recognizing immediately that they had successfully identified the core processing units, but had misunderstood the power distribution requirements. If they attempted to activate the system as currently configured, they would likely damage several critical components. This gave her an opportunity. "The power coupling is incorrect," she said. "These systems require stepped voltage regulation. If you apply standard power, you'll burn out the primary processors." Commander frowned. "The specifications indicate standard 12-volt operation." "The specifications are incomplete. Military equipment often requires additional safety protocols that aren't documented in basic technical manuals." It was a plausible lie. Most complex electronic systems did require specific power conditioning, and military equipment was notorious for having undocumented operational requirements. "Show us the correct procedure." For the next hour, Nighthawk guided them through what appeared to be proper system configuration, while actually introducing subtle sabotage that would prevent the equipment from functioning correctly. She rerouted several data connections, adjusted voltage regulators to unstable settings, and installed software patches that would cause system failures under specific conditions. The beauty of her approach was that everything she did appeared to be legitimate technical work. Her captors were knowledgeable enough to follow her instructions, but not experienced enough to recognize sophisticated sabotage disguised as proper procedure. When they finally attempted to activate the system, the initial results appeared promising. Status lights illuminated, diagnostic routines ran successfully, and the primary interface displayed what looked like normal operational parameters. "Excellent," Commander said. "Now demonstrate the communication disruption capabilities." This was the moment Nighthawk had been working toward. The system would appear to function normally for approximately 30 minutes before her sabotage took effect. During that window, she needed to find a way to escape or signal for rescue. "I'll need to establish a baseline signal environment first," she said. "The system requires initial calibration against known communication sources." "What kind of sources?" "Military radio frequencies, satellite links, cellular networks. The broader the spectrum, the more accurate the calibration." Commander gestured to Anton, who produced a handheld radio and began scanning through various frequencies. As expected, they immediately detected multiple communication signals, including what sounded like routine military traffic. "Perfect," Nighthawk said, making adjustments to the system interface. "Now the system will map the electronic environment and identify optimal disruption points." What she was actually doing was activating a hidden subroutine that would broadcast her exact position on multiple emergency frequencies, while making it appear that the system was conducting routine calibration procedures. The transmission would last exactly 47 seconds and would include her identification codes, status report, and a request for immediate extraction. More importantly, it would confirm that American military technology had been compromised and required emergency response. As the system completed its calibration, Nighthawk watched the countdown timer she had mentally established. In approximately 25 minutes, her sabotage would take effect, and the equipment would suffer what appeared to be catastrophic system failure. In the confusion that followed, she would have a brief window to escape. But first, she needed to ensure that her rescue signal had been received and properly interpreted. The opportunity came when Commander was called away to deal with what Anton described as a security issue. Left alone with just 2 guards, neither of whom spoke fluent English, Nighthawk began the final phase of her plan. "The system is detecting interference," she announced, pointing to warning indicators she had programmed to activate. "There may be hostile surveillance in the area." The guards looked concerned but didn't understand the technical implications. One of them called for Anton, who arrived just as the first phase of her sabotage began to manifest. "What's happening?" he demanded, staring at error messages scrolling across the display screen. "Electromagnetic interference from an unknown source," Nighthawk replied. "The system is designed to shut down automatically if it detects active countermeasures." This was partially true. The system did have automatic shutdown procedures, though they weren't triggered by the conditions she was describing. "Can you fix it?" "Maybe, but I need access to the communication array to determine the source of the interference." Anton hesitated, clearly aware that allowing her near communication equipment posed security risks. But the alternative was watching millions of dollars worth of captured technology become permanently inoperable. "You have 5 minutes," he said. "2 guards stay with you at all times." 5 minutes was more than enough. The communication array was located on the roof of the main building, disguised as mining equipment, but clearly designed for long-range transmission. As Nighthawk examined the setup, she identified multiple satellite uplinks, digital radio systems, and what appeared to be encrypted communication devices. "I need to isolate the interference source," she told her guards, connecting her personal communicator to what appeared to be a diagnostic port, but was actually a direct interface to the facility's primary transmission system. With practiced efficiency, she uploaded a data package that would automatically transmit her complete intelligence assessment of the facility to American forces every 30 minutes until manually disabled. The transmission would include detailed information about the facility's layout, personnel, equipment, and most importantly, evidence of the security breach that had provided her captors with classified technical specifications. When she finished, the electronic warfare system below suffered what appeared to be total system failure, complete with smoke effects and the smell of burned electronics. "The interference was too strong," she told Antoine when they returned to the workshop. "The system's protection circuits activated and burned out the primary processors." Commander arrived to find his technical specialists staring at expensive equipment that had been reduced to non-functional scrap. "Can it be repaired?" "Not without replacement components that are only available from the manufacturer," Nighthawk replied. "And those components are export-controlled by the American government." The look on Commander's face suggested that he was beginning to understand the true cost of his operation. But what he didn't know was that American rescue forces were already in motion, guided by the intelligence data that Nighthawk had successfully transmitted. 8,000 miles away, in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, the situation had escalated beyond a simple pilot rescue to a major intelligence crisis requiring immediate response. General Patricia Morrison, the Air Force Chief of Staff, stood before a wall-mounted display showing real-time satellite imagery of the mining facility where Captain Valdez was being held. The images revealed a sophisticated operation that bore no resemblance to the small-scale militia activity described in previous intelligence assessments. "How long has this facility been operational?" she asked the intelligence briefer, a Navy captain whose expression suggested he was delivering news that no one wanted to hear. Based on construction analysis and communication intercepts, at least 18 months, possibly longer. And we had no knowledge of its existence. The facility was deliberately concealed using legitimate mining permits and corporate shell companies. Our satellite surveillance classified it as industrial infrastructure rather than a military installation. Secretary of Defense William Chen leaned forward in his chair. What about the classified specifications? How did they obtain detailed technical manuals for systems that are restricted to need-to-know access? That investigation is ongoing, but preliminary analysis suggests the breach originated from within the defense contractor community. The level of detail they possess indicates someone with extraordinary access provided complete documentation. General Morrison studied the satellite images more carefully. This isn't random piracy. This is a professional intelligence operation with significant resources and inside knowledge of American military capabilities. That's our assessment as well, the briefer confirmed. The facility appears to be designed specifically for the analysis and reverse engineering of captured Western military technology. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Admiral James Reeves spoke for the first time since the briefing began. What's the current status of Captain Valdez? She transmitted detailed intelligence on the facility approximately 6 hours ago. The data suggests she has successfully sabotaged the captured equipment and is prepared for extraction. Then why are we still talking instead of launching a rescue operation? Secretary Chen activated a secure video link to the White House Situation Room, where President Catherine Walsh was chairing an emergency National Security Council meeting. Madam President, we have confirmation that Captain Valdez is alive and has provided critical intelligence on a previously unknown threat. We're requesting immediate authorization for extraction. The President's response was immediate, authorized, but I want more than just a pilot rescue. I want that facility neutralized, and I want answers about how classified specifications ended up in enemy hands. Understood, Madam President. Operations will commence within 12 hours. As the video link closed, General Morrison turned to the assembled staff officers. Gentlemen, we're not just extracting a pilot. We're conducting a counterintelligence operation that may determine whether American military technology remains secure or becomes available to every hostile organization with sufficient funding. The mission planning that followed would involve resources from multiple branches of the military, intelligence agencies, and special operations units. But the success or failure of the entire operation would ultimately depend on whether Captain Reese Valdez could survive long enough for rescue to arrive. The rescue operation, designated Crimson Phoenix, began at 200 hours with a flight of 4 F-22 Raptors establishing air superiority over the target area. Flying at 40,000 feet and using advanced stealth capabilities, the fighters were invisible to ground-based radar systems while providing real-time intelligence and tactical support for the forces below. At the same time, 2 MH-60M Black Hawks lifted off from a forward operating base established on a U.S. Navy destroyer, positioned just outside Sierra Leone's territorial waters. Each helicopter carried a 12-man team from the 75th Ranger Regiment, operators specially trained in hostage rescue and sensitive site exploitation. But the most critical element of the operation was Captain Maria Santos, an Air Force intelligence officer who had worked with Nighthawk during the development of the captured electronic warfare system. Santos would be responsible for ensuring that no classified technology fell into enemy hands and for conducting initial assessment of the security breach. Phoenix Base, this is Phoenix 1, reported the lead pilot as the helicopters crossed into Sierra Leonean airspace. We have visual contact with the target facility. Thermal imaging shows approximately 30 personnel and multiple structures consistent with intelligence reports. The plan called for simultaneous assault on three objectives: extraction of Captain Valdez, neutralization of the facility's communication capabilities, and recovery or destruction of any captured American military equipment. The operation needed to be completed within 20 minutes to avoid response from Sierra Leonean military forces. Phoenix 1, you are cleared for final approach. Overlord has confirmed that the target has activated her emergency beacon and is prepared for extraction. What the rescue teams didn't know was that Commander had anticipated the possibility of rescue attempts and had prepared accordingly. As the Black Hawks approached the facility, hidden surface-to-air missile launchers emerged from concealed positions in the jungle. The first missile missed Phoenix 1 by less than 50 feet, its proximity fuse activated by the helicopter's electronic countermeasures. The second missile was defeated by chaff and flare dispensers, but the third found its target. Phoenix 2 took a direct hit to its tail rotor assembly, sending the aircraft into an uncontrolled spin that ended with a hard landing in the jungle approximately 2 miles from the target facility. All 12 Rangers aboard survived the crash, but half were injured and the helicopter was a total loss. Phoenix Base, this is Phoenix 1. Phoenix 2 is down. We're continuing to target with reduced personnel. Copy, Phoenix 1. Be advised that fast movers are inbound to suppress hostile air defenses. The F-22s that had been providing overwatch suddenly became active participants, engaging the missile launchers with precision-guided munitions that eliminated the surface-to-air threat in less than 30 seconds. But the damage was done. The rescue operation had lost half its ground personnel before the assault had even begun. Inside the facility, Nighthawk heard the explosions and knew that her rescue had arrived. But she also knew that Commander would not allow her to be taken alive if capture seemed inevitable. The intelligence she possessed about the security breach and the facility's operations made her too valuable to lose and too dangerous to release. "Time to move," Anton said, bursting into her room with 2 armed guards. "Your people are here, but they won't find what they're looking for." He led her through corridors she hadn't seen before, past rooms filled with computer equipment, and what appeared to be additional captured American military hardware. The scale of the operation was far larger than she had realized. This wasn't just about her electronic warfare system, but about systematic theft and analysis of Western military technology. They reached a fortified bunker beneath the main building, just as the first Rangers fast-roped from Phoenix 1 onto the facility's roof. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the concrete walls as the assault team began clearing the upper levels. "Your government will negotiate," Commander said, joining them in the bunker. "They cannot afford to lose you or allow this facility to be captured intact." "You're wrong," Nighthawk replied. "They'll destroy everything rather than let it fall into enemy hands. Even if that means destroying you as well." The question hung in the air as the sounds of battle grew closer. American forces were systematically clearing the facility, but they were also discovering the true scope of the intelligence operation they had stumbled into. Captain Santos, who had landed with the first wave of Rangers, was conducting rapid assessment of the captured equipment and documents. What she found would change American understanding of the global threat to military technology security. "Phoenix Base, this is Phoenix 7, she reported over secure communication. "We have confirmed compromise of multiple classified systems. This is not an isolated incident. Request immediate expansion of operational parameters." The response from command was immediate. "Phoenix 7, you are authorized to conduct complete site exploitation. Nothing leaves that facility intact." As Rangers placed demolition charges throughout the complex, Nighthawk realized that her rescue had become something far more significant. The discovery of this facility would trigger a comprehensive review of American military security procedures, and potentially lead to major changes in how classified technology was protected and distributed. But first, she needed to survive the next 20 minutes. The bunker door exploded inward with a flash of bright light and concussive force that left everyone temporarily stunned. Through the smoke and debris, two Rangers emerged with weapons raised and night vision equipment glowing green in the darkness. "American pilot, identify yourself," one of them shouted. "Captain Reese Valdez, call sign Nighthawk," she replied, raising her hands to show she was unarmed. "I'm the package you're here to extract." The Rangers quickly secured the bunker, zip-tying the captured personnel while medics checked Nighthawk for injuries. She was bruised and dehydrated but otherwise unharmed. "Ma'am, we need to move immediately," the team leader said. "This facility is going to be destroyed in approximately 15 minutes. As they made their way through the facility toward the extraction point, Nighthawk saw the full scope of what the Rangers had discovered. Room after room contained captured American military equipment, detailed technical specifications, and what appeared to be reverse engineering projects in various stages of completion. "How long has this been going on?" she asked Captain Santos, who was photographing documents before the facility's destruction. "Based on what we found, at least 3 years, maybe longer. This facility has been systematically acquiring and analyzing American military technology through a network of contacts in the defense contracting community. And my aircraft was specifically targeted because of the electronic warfare system. They knew exactly what you were carrying and when you would be flying. The implications were staggering. American military operations had been compromised by a sophisticated intelligence network that had successfully penetrated the most secure levels of defense contracting. The capture of her aircraft hadn't been opportunistic. It had been the culmination of a long-term operation designed to acquire specific technology. "Phoenix Base, this is Phoenix 1. Package is secure and ready for extraction. Site destruction will commence in 10 minutes. As the Black Hawk lifted off with Nighthawk aboard, she watched thermite charges ignite throughout the facility below. Within minutes, the entire complex was engulfed in flames hot enough to melt steel and destroy any evidence of the intelligence operation it had housed. But the real investigation was just beginning. The personnel captured during the raid would be interrogated, the documents recovered would be analyzed, and the security breach that had made the entire operation possible would be traced back to its source. For Captain Reese Valdez, the ordeal was over. But for American military intelligence, it was just the beginning of a much larger and more complex challenge. The debriefing lasted 6 days and took place at a secure facility in Germany that officially didn't exist. Nighthawk was questioned by representatives from the Air Force, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the CIA, and several organizations whose names she wasn't cleared to know. The questions were exhaustive. Every detail of her capture, every conversation with her captors, every piece of equipment she had observed, and every document she had seen. But the most important questions focused on the security breach that had provided her captors with classified technical specifications. "Based on your observations, how would you assess the source of the leaked information?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, a Defense Intelligence Agency analyst who had been studying the captured documents. "The level of detail was extraordinary," Nighthawk replied. "They had complete technical manuals, operational procedures, and even classified maintenance protocols. That information could only have come from someone with extensive access to the most sensitive aspects of the program. Someone within the defense contracting community. Or someone with the ability to access contractor systems. The documents I saw weren't just technical specifications. They were internal communications, budget projections, and operational assessments. That suggests systematic penetration of multiple organizations." The investigation that followed would eventually reveal a sophisticated Chinese intelligence operation that had been running for nearly a decade. Using a network of compromised contractors, bribed officials, and sophisticated cyber intrusions, Chinese military intelligence had gained access to some of America's most closely guarded technological secrets. But the immediate concern was damage assessment. How much classified technology had been compromised, which systems needed to be redesigned, which operations had been exposed. "Captain Valdez," said Colonel Rebecca Torres, the Air Force intelligence officer leading the debriefing, "your actions during captivity prevented a major intelligence disaster. The sabotage you conducted and the intelligence you transmitted allowed us to respond before the situation became completely uncontainable." "What about the personnel who were captured?" "They're being processed through appropriate channels. The information they provide will help us understand the full scope of the operation and identify other potential targets." When the debriefing finally ended, Nighthawk was given a choice: return to operational flying or accept a position with the intelligence community helping to investigate and prevent future technology theft. She chose to return to flying, but with a new understanding of the larger strategic challenges facing American military forces in an era of global competition and technological espionage. Her next assignment would take her to the Pacific, where Chinese military expansion was creating new challenges for American air power, and where the lessons learned from her experience in West Africa would prove increasingly relevant. But first, she had to face the most difficult part of her ordeal: explaining to her family why she had been declared missing for nearly a week without any official explanation. The homecoming was bittersweet. Nighthawk's parents met her at Dover Air Force Base, where she landed aboard a military transport aircraft that had made the journey from Germany in complete secrecy. The reunion was emotional but brief. She was still bound by classification restrictions that prevented her from discussing most aspects of her experience. "We were told you were involved in a training accident," her mother said, embracing her daughter with the fierce intensity of someone who had spent days fearing the worst. "Something like that," Nighthawk replied, knowing that the official story would remain classified for years to come. Her father, a retired Air Force Master Sergeant who had spent 30 years working around classified programs, understood the constraints she faced. "The important thing is that you're home safe." But safety was a relative concept. The investigation into the security breach had revealed that the Chinese intelligence operation was far more extensive than initially believed, and that American military personnel involved in sensitive programs faced ongoing threats from sophisticated adversaries. Within weeks of her return, Nighthawk received a new assignment: test pilot for advanced electronic warfare systems at Edwards Air Force Base. The position would allow her to continue flying while contributing to the development of technologies designed to counter the threats she had encountered in West Africa. The work was challenging and often frustrating. Every system had to be designed with the assumption that its specifications would eventually be compromised, which meant building in redundancy, deception, and self-protection measures that made the equipment more complex and expensive. But it was also deeply satisfying. She was helping to develop capabilities that would protect future American military personnel from the kinds of threats she had faced, and she was working with teams of engineers and intelligence analysts who understood the stakes involved. Her reputation within the Air Force had been transformed by her experience. The pilot who had once been viewed as unconventional and potentially problematic was now regarded as someone who could be trusted with the most sensitive missions and the most advanced technology. The nickname Nighthawk had taken on new meaning. It was no longer just a reference to her ability to fly undetected through enemy airspace, but to her capacity to operate effectively in the shadowy world of international intelligence competition. But success brought new challenges. As her security clearance was upgraded and her access to classified programs expanded, she found herself increasingly isolated from the normal social interactions that made military life bearable. The friends she had made during her earlier assignments were no longer cleared to know what she was working on, and the people she worked with now were bound by the same restrictions that prevented meaningful personal relationships. It was a price she was willing to pay, but it was also a constant reminder that her experience in West Africa had changed her life in ways that extended far beyond her professional duties. 2 years after her rescue, Nighthawk was promoted to major and given command of a test squadron responsible for evaluating advanced electronic warfare systems. The position came with significant responsibility, but also with access to intelligence assessments that painted a sobering picture of the global threat environment. Chinese military modernization was accelerating, driven in part by technology stolen from American defense programs. Russian electronic warfare capabilities were advancing rapidly, based on detailed understanding of American systems and procedures, and smaller nations were gaining access to sophisticated military technologies through networks of arms dealers and intelligence operatives. The world that Nighthawk had entered as a young pilot eager to serve her country had become far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined. But it was also a world where her unique combination of flying skills, technical knowledge, and operational experience made her invaluable to American national security. Her squadron's work was contributing to the development of systems that would help maintain American military superiority in an era of increasing competition. But perhaps more importantly, her experience was helping to train a new generation of pilots who would face even greater challenges in the years ahead. The lessons she had learned in a jungle clearing in West Africa about the importance of adaptability, the value of unconventional thinking, and the need to maintain operational security were becoming integral parts of Air Force training programs. Her story, carefully edited to remove classified details, was being used as a case study in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. Future pilots would learn from her experience, hopefully avoiding similar situations while being better prepared if they found themselves in comparable circumstances. But the most important lesson was one that couldn't be easily taught: that in a world of global competition and technological espionage, American military personnel needed to understand that they were not just warriors, but guardians of national secrets that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. The responsibility was enormous, but it was also the price of serving in an era when the stakes had never been higher. The congressional hearing took place in a secure facility beneath the Capitol building, where members of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees gathered to receive classified briefings on the security breach that had nearly cost America some of its most sensitive military technology. Major Valdez sat at a witness table facing a panel of legislators who had been cleared to receive information about the Chinese intelligence operation and its implications for American national security. Her testimony would help shape future legislation governing the protection of classified military technology. Major Valdez, said Congressman Robert Martinez, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, in your assessment, how significant was the intelligence compromise you discovered? Congressman, the facility we uncovered contained classified specifications for dozens of American military systems spanning multiple decades. The level of detail suggested systematic penetration of our most sensitive defense programs. And the source of this compromise? The investigation revealed a sophisticated network of compromised contractors, bribed officials, and cyber intrusions that had been operating for nearly a decade. The Chinese intelligence services had successfully identified and exploited vulnerabilities in our technology security systems. Senator Elizabeth Warren leaned forward. What changes would you recommend to prevent similar breaches in the future? Ma'am, the current system relies too heavily on compartmentalization and clearance levels that don't adequately address the realities of modern intelligence operations. We need more robust technical security measures, better monitoring of contractor activities, and improved counterintelligence capabilities. The questioning continued for several hours, covering everything from the operational details of her rescue to the broader implications of technological espionage for American military superiority. But the most pointed questions focused on accountability. Major Valdez, said Senator Tom Cotton, should there be consequences for the officials and contractors whose negligence enabled this security breach? Senator, I believe that accountability is essential for maintaining the integrity of our classification systems, but the focus should be on preventing future breaches rather than assigning blame for past failures. Her testimony would contribute to the passage of the Defense Technology Security Act, legislation that dramatically increased penalties for mishandling classified information and established new oversight mechanisms for defense contractors working on sensitive programs. But the real impact of her experience would be felt in the changes to operational procedures, training programs, and security protocols that would govern American military operations for years to come. As she left the hearing room, Major Valdez reflected on how far she had come from the young pilot who had been dismissed as lucky during her early training. Her experience had transformed her from someone who was viewed with skepticism to someone whose insights were shaping national security policy. The journey had been costly, personally, professionally, and emotionally, but it had also been necessary. In a world where American military superiority could no longer be taken for granted, someone needed to understand the true nature of the threats facing the nation. That understanding had come at a price, but it was a price she was willing to pay in service to something larger than herself. The awards ceremony took place at the Pentagon, in a room where the walls were lined with portraits of previous recipients of the Air Force Cross, the service's second highest decoration for valor. Major Valdez stood at attention as the citation was read, describing her actions during captivity and the intelligence she had provided that led to the disruption of a major espionage operation. But as she listened to the formal language describing her extraordinary heroism and exceptional courage, she thought about the real story that would never be told publicly. The fear she had felt when she realized her government had abandoned her, the calculations she had made when deciding whether to cooperate with her captors, and the loneliness of serving in a world where the most important work could never be discussed. The medal itself was beautiful, a bronze cross suspended from a blue ribbon with white stripes, but what it represented was something far more complex than simple heroism. It was recognition of the burdens carried by those who served in the shadows, protecting secrets that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. After the ceremony, she was approached by a young Air Force lieutenant who had recently completed pilot training. "Ma'am," the lieutenant said, "I've been following your story. I'm hoping to be assigned to electronic warfare systems myself." "It's challenging work," Nighthawk replied, "but it's also incredibly important. The threats we face today are more sophisticated than anything previous generations of pilots had to deal with." "Any advice, ma'am?" "Stay curious, stay adaptable, and never assume that the enemy is playing by the same rules you learned in training. The moment you become predictable is the moment you become vulnerable." The young lieutenant nodded, clearly taking the advice to heart. She reminded Nighthawk of herself at that age, eager, confident, and unaware of the complexities that lay ahead. As she walked through the Pentagon corridors after the ceremony, Nighthawk encountered colleagues who had worked with her on various classified programs. Some offered congratulations, others simply nodded in recognition of shared understanding about the realities of their work. But the most meaningful moment came when she encountered Colonel Webb, her former squadron commander from Nellis Air Force Base, who had first recognized her potential for unconventional thinking. "I always knew you were special," he said, "but I never imagined you'd end up briefing Congress and receiving decorations at the Pentagon." "I never imagined it either, sir, but I've learned that service sometimes takes you in directions you never expected. The important thing is that you were ready when the moment came. That's what separates good pilots from great ones." As she left the Pentagon that evening, Major Valdez reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a young pilot dismissed as lucky to a decorated officer whose experience was shaping national security policy, she had traveled a path that few could have predicted. But perhaps that was the point. In a world of increasing uncertainty and evolving threats, the military needed people who could adapt, improvise, and succeed in situations that hadn't been anticipated by training manuals or operational procedures. Her story wasn't just about survival or heroism. It was about the importance of thinking differently, questioning assumptions, and remaining flexible in the face of unexpected challenges. Those were lessons that would serve her well in the years ahead, as she continued to fly, to serve, and to protect the secrets that kept America safe. The final assignment of Major Valdez's career brought her full circle, back to Nellis Air Force Base, where she would serve as the commander of the 64th Aggressor Squadron, the same unit where she had first earned recognition for her unconventional tactical thinking. But the squadron she inherited was different from the one she had known as a young lieutenant. The threats it was designed to replicate had evolved dramatically, incorporating lessons learned from her experience in West Africa and the broader intelligence competition with China and Russia. The pilots under her command were training to face adversaries who had detailed knowledge of American tactics and technology, who could exploit vulnerabilities in American systems, and who operated according to strategic frameworks that differed fundamentally from Western military doctrine. "The enemy you'll face in real combat," she told her pilots during their first squadron meeting, "will not be the one described in your training manuals. They will have studied our procedures, identified our weaknesses, and developed countermeasures for our most advanced systems." The training programs she developed emphasized adaptability, creative problem-solving, and the ability to operate effectively when standard procedures failed. Her pilots learned to think like adversaries, to exploit the same vulnerabilities that enemy forces might target, and to develop tactical innovations that couldn't be anticipated by hostile intelligence services. But perhaps most importantly, they learned to understand the broader strategic context of their missions. They weren't just pilots. They were guardians of American military superiority in an era when that superiority could no longer be taken for granted. The reputation of the 64th Aggressor Squadron grew rapidly under her command. Pilots who trained against her unit reported that the experience was more challenging and more realistic than any previous preparation they had received. More significantly, the tactical innovations developed within her squadron were being adopted by operational units throughout the Air Force. The lessons learned from her experience in West Africa had evolved into training programs that would prepare American pilots for the challenges they would face in future conflicts. As she watched her pilots practice the techniques she had developed, Major Valdez felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Her experience had been transformed from personal ordeal into institutional knowledge that would benefit the Air Force for years to come. But she also understood that her work was far from over. The threats facing American military forces continued to evolve, and staying ahead of those threats required constant innovation, continuous learning, and the willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. The pilot who had once been dismissed as lucky had become one of the most influential tactical innovators in the Air Force. Her story was proof that sometimes the most valuable contributions came from those who thought differently, who questioned assumptions, and who refused to accept that things had to be done the way they had always been done. As she prepared for her next assignment, a position with the Pentagon's strategic planning staff that would influence Air Force doctrine for the next decade, Major Valdez reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had served her country with distinction, protected its secrets, and helped prepare the next generation of pilots for the challenges they would face. But perhaps most importantly, she had demonstrated that American military superiority depended not just on advanced technology or overwhelming resources, but on the ability to think creatively, adapt quickly, and maintain the moral courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. Those were lessons that would serve the Air Force well in the years ahead, as it faced threats that couldn't be anticipated and challenges that couldn't be solved through conventional approaches. The story of Captain Reese, Nighthawk, Valdez had become more than just an individual tale of survival and heroism. It had become a symbol of the kind of thinking and leadership that would be required to maintain American military effectiveness in an era of increasing global competition. And in a world where the stakes continued to rise, that kind of thinking would be more valuable than ever. The retirement ceremony took place on a clear morning at Edwards Air Force Base, where Colonel Valdez had spent the final years of her career developing the next generation of electronic warfare systems. The assembled crowd included pilots she had trained, engineers she had worked with, and intelligence analysts whose careers had been shaped by her insights. But the most meaningful presence was that of her parents, now in their 70s, who had watched their daughter transform from a young pilot with unconventional instincts into one of the most respected officers in the Air Force. As the final honors were rendered and the flag was folded, Colonel Valdez reflected on a career that had taken her from the cockpit of an F-16 to the halls of the Pentagon, from a jungle clearing in West Africa to classified briefing rooms where the future of American military strategy was being debated. The challenges she had faced, the security breach that had nearly cost America its most sensitive military secrets, the intelligence operation that had systematically targeted American technology, and the personal ordeal that had tested every aspect of her training and character, had shaped not just her own career, but the entire Air Force's approach to security and training. The lessons learned from her experience would continue to influence American military operations for years to come. The tactical innovations she had developed were being taught at pilot training schools around the world. The security procedures she had helped design were protecting classified technology from future threats. But perhaps most importantly, her story had demonstrated that American military superiority depended not just on advanced technology or overwhelming resources, but on the ability to think creatively, adapt quickly, and maintain the moral courage to do what was right even when it was difficult. As she walked away from the ceremony, Colonel Valdez knew that her service to her country was far from over. The threats facing America were evolving constantly, and the nation would need people who understood those threats and could develop effective countermeasures. Her next chapter would involve teaching at the Air Force Academy, where she would help prepare the next generation of officers for the challenges they would face in an era of increasing global competition and technological espionage. The young cadets she would teach would inherit a more complex and dangerous world than the one she had entered as a lieutenant. But they would also inherit the knowledge and experience that had been earned through decades of service, sacrifice, and dedication to something larger than themselves. The story of Nighthawk had become part of Air Force legend, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable contributions came from those who thought differently, who questioned assumptions, and who refused to accept that things had to be done the way they had always been done. In a world where American military superiority could no longer be taken for granted, that kind of thinking would be more valuable than ever. And in the halls of the Air Force Academy, where the next generation of leaders was being prepared. The lessons learned from one pilot's experience in a jungle clearing would continue to shape American military strategy for years to come. The legacy of Colonel Reese, Nighthawk, Valdez would live on in every pilot who learned to think creatively, every officer who questioned conventional wisdom, and every leader who understood that true security came not from following rules, but from the courage to break them when necessary. Her story was proof that, in a world of increasing uncertainty and evolving threats, the military needed people who could adapt, improvise, and succeed in situations that hadn't been anticipated by training manuals or operational procedures. And in the end, that might be the most important lesson of all.